The late Saturday afternoon sun, a molten gold pouring over Serenity Oaks, did little to warm Anya Sharma. Usually the end of a grueling week navigating the treacherous currents of federal prosecution brought a sliver of peace. Today, it felt like an interrogation lamp. She locked her car, the click unnaturally loud in the opulent quiet of the enclave, a world of sprawling Tudors and landscapes sculpted with an almost fanatical precision. Serenity Oaks prided itself on its exclusivity, its meticulously enforced bylaws, a testament to a rigid, unyielding order. Anya was here on a mission of personal indulgence, a rare foray into normalcy, her niece's U10 soccer game. She was attempting, with the grim determination she usually reserved for cross-examinations, to shed the formidable mantle of United States Attorney for the Eastern District. For a few hours, she just wanted to be Aunt Anya, the one who supplied questionable sideline snacks and whose cheers were embarrassingly enthusiastic. But the universe, it seemed, had other far more familiar plans for her day. As she walked towards the distant, cheerful sounds of whistles and children's shouts, a scene unfolded near the manicured entrance to the community's absurdly grand clubhouse. It stopped her dead in her tracks. The shift was instantaneous, visceral. The aunt vanished, and the prosecutor, honed by years of confronting injustice, snapped into sharp focus. A uniformed Serenity Oaks Homeowners Association security officer, a burly man whose ill-fitting uniform strained across his considerable girth like a sausage casing, was in the process of violently subduing a slender teenage boy. The boy, his face a mask of terror and pain, walked with a pronounced, uneven gait. He was being slammed with brutal force against the hard plastic side of a community patrol golf cart. A small, insulated medical cooler lay discarded on the pristine Bermuda grass nearby its precious contents. Life itself, perhaps, threatening to spill. "I'm telling you, I'm just delivering medication." The boy cried out, his voice cracking with fear and agony. His arm twisted at an unnatural, sickening angle behind his back by the officer. "It's insulin for Mrs. Peterson. She needs it. Please." "You were speeding on a community pathway and you're operating an unauthorized delivery service, son." The officer, whose name tag read R. Thorne, Senior Security Officer, snarled. His face flushed a dangerous shade of crimson. He applied more pressure, a grimace of satisfaction twisting his lips. "And I don't like your attitude. You're resisting." Resisting from where Anya stood, the boy was merely trying to remain upright to draw a breath under the officer's savage ministrations. This wasn't an arrest. It was a blatant assault, cloaked in the flimsy, dubious authority of an HOA uniform. A cold, familiar fire ignited in Anya's gut. It was the same righteous fury that had propelled her through the grueling years of law school, up the demanding, often unforgiving ladder of the Department of Justice. She had built her career, her very identity, on fighting bullies, on holding those who abused power accountable regardless of their uniform or station. And Officer R. Thorne, in this horrifying moment, was the grotesque epitome of both. The central searing question that sliced through Anya's desperate attempt at a peaceful Saturday afternoon was not merely who this terrified, disabled boy was, or why this glorified neighborhood watchman felt entitled to inflict such casual, vicious violence. It was what she, Anya Sharma, the district's chief federal law enforcement officer, was going to do about an injustice unfolding so brazenly, so contemptuously, before her very eyes. The soccer game was forgotten. Her duty was here. Anya Sharma's professional life was a relentless immersion in the darkest, most intricate labyrinth of federal law. Her office, one of the busiest and most high-profile in the nation, was a crucible where the raw material of human failing was forged into the cold, hard steel of justice. They handled everything, sprawling white-collar fraud cases that could topple corporations, shadowy international terrorism plots that threatened national security, insidious public corruption that eroded faith in institutions, and the often brutal, deeply personal violations of federal civil rights statutes. Her days were a blur of high-stakes, case strategy meetings with her sharp, dedicated assistant U.S. attorneys, intense courtroom appearances where truth and falsehood clashed, delicate, high-wire negotiations with formidable defense counsel, and the constant crushing weight of making decisions that carried profound, life-altering consequences for victims, for defendants, for communities. She was known for her incisive intellect, Her almost obsessive, meticulous preparation, her unwavering, almost reverent commitment to the rule of law, and her tenacious, some whispered, fearsome courtroom presence. But beneath the steely exterior lay a fierce, burning passion for civil rights enforcement. This passion was not an abstract legal principle. It was deeply personal, born from her own experiences as a woman of color, navigating traditionally powerful, often stubbornly resistant institutions. She understood in her bones what it felt like to be marginalized, to be underestimated, to be silenced. She had recently overseen the successful politically fraught prosecution of several local law enforcement officers for excessive force. The case had been a hornet's nest, but the evidence was irrefutable, the law clear. It had reinforced her reputation as a prosecutor who would not flinch, who would not shy away from holding even uniformed officials accountable when they crossed the sacred line between legitimate authority and brutal abuse. The nebulous concept of qualified immunity, particularly when applied to private security personnel acting under vaguely defined, often arbitrary HOA authority, was a legal gray area she found profoundly troubling, ripe for exploitation. Liam Davies, the 16-year-old boy now enduring Officer Thorne's unwarranted savage brutality, was a resident of this very same Serenity Oaks. He was known in his small circle as a quiet, studious teenager, remarkable for his innate kindness and a surprising, quiet resilience that belied his physical challenges. Liam lived with type 1 diabetes, a relentless, demanding condition that required constant vigilance, meticulous blood sugar monitoring, and multiple daily insulin injections. It was a daily tightrope walk between life-threatening highs and debilitating lows. This deeply personal experience with the critical, unforgiving nature of medication had inspired him. Using his specially adapted electric scooter, a necessity due to a slight mobility issue in his left leg, resulting from a childhood illness, Liam volunteered. He delivered prescription medications from the local pharmacy to elderly or homebound residents within the sprawling, often isolating Serenity Oaks community. It was his way of contributing, of weaving threads of connection, of making a tangible difference in a world that often felt indifferent to vulnerability. One of his regular, most cherished deliveries was to Mrs. Eleanor Peterson, an 82-year-old widow, who also suffered from severe diabetes. Her failing eyesight made it nearly impossible for her to manage her own complex medication regimen. Liam's deliveries of her insulin twice a day, every day, were not just a convenience, they were quite literally her lifeline. A missed dose could be catastrophic. Officer Rick Thorne, on the other hand, was a different, far more malignant breed of Serenity Oaks resident. A former military policeman, he had been dishonorably discharged for a documented pattern of excessive force, a fact conveniently omitted from his HOA employment application. He had found a new, disturbingly suitable outlet for his ingrained authoritarian impulses and simmering resentment as a senior security officer for the Serenity Oaks Homeowners Association. He patrolled the immaculately kept sterile pathways of Serenity Oaks with a self-important, puffed-up swagger, a petty tyrant in a golf cart. He was quick to issue citations, his voice dripping with condescension, for infractions as trivial as improperly placed garbage cans, children riding bicycles without helmets, or even unseemly lawn ornaments. He was notorious among the residents for his aggressive, confrontational demeanor, his unerring ability to escalate minor situations, and his particular openly expressed disdain for teenagers, whom he generally regarded as delinquents in training, a blight on his perfect community. His actions, his abuses of his minimal authority, were often tacitly and sometimes alarmingly explicitly supported by the Serenity Oaks HOA president, a Mr. Arthur Henderson. Henderson was a man whose primary concerns in life seemed to be maintaining the community's exclusive image and ensuring that property values remained stratospherically artificially high, often at the direct expense of basic human decency, compassion, or common sense. Henderson saw Thorne not as a liability, but as an asset in his crusade for aesthetic purity and social control. The inciting incident, the spark that had ignited Thorne's simmering aggression into a full-blown public assault, had been by any rational objective measure utterly trivial. Liam, running slightly late for his critical delivery to Mrs. Peterson due to an unforeseen problem with his scooter's battery, had been carefully navigating a paved community access path that cut discreetly behind the clubhouse. He was perhaps going a mile or two over the ridiculously low 5-mile speed limit imposed by the HOA for non-vehicular traffic, a rule Thorne enforced with religious zeal. Officer Thorne, lurking nearby in his golf cart like a predator in wait, seemingly materialized out of nowhere, cutting Liam off. Hold it right there, son." Thorne had barked his voice a sudden, startling intrusion, pulling his cart directly across Liam's path, forcing the boy to an abrupt, jarring stop that nearly sent him tumbling. "You're exceeding the posted speed limit on a pedestrian walkway. And what's this?" He gestured with a contemptuous flick of his wrist towards the insulated cooler strapped securely to Liam's scooter. "Running some kind of illegal delivery business in Serenity Oaks now, are we? That's a clear violation of HOA commercial activity, bylaws section 7, paragraph C. You know the rules." Liam, startled and his heart pounding, but ever polite, had tried to explain, his voice earnest. "Officer, I'm not running a business, sir. I'm a volunteer. This is vital insulin for Mrs. Peterson. She's diabetic, and she's waiting for it. It's very important." He unzipped the cooler slightly, trying to show the clearly marked pharmaceutical packaging, the ice packs keeping the delicate medication stable. "And I'm truly sorry if I was going a little fast. My scooter's battery was acting up, and I just didn't want her to miss her dose. She really needs this." Thorne had merely scoffed, his eyes, cold, reptilian, and utterly dismissive. "Insulin, huh? Or is it something else you're peddling to the old folks around here, kid? Some kind of drugs?" His gaze raked over Liam, lingering on his leg, a sneer playing on his lips. "I've had my eye on you, Davies. Always zipping around looking suspicious like you own the place. Think your little leg thing gives you a free pass?" He completely deliberately ignored Liam's clear explanation about his disability, his volunteer work, the undeniably critical nature of the medication. Instead, Thorne seemed to feed on Liam's polite, almost desperate attempts to de-escalate. His aggression visibly ratcheted up his posture, becoming more menacing. "License and registration for this vehicle," he'd demanded, gesturing sharply at the scooter, fully maliciously aware that no such registration existed or was required for a personal mobility device. When Liam, confused and increasingly frightened, had tried to explain this simple fact, Thorne had pounced. "So now you're being insubordinate. Are you failing to comply with a lawful directive from a uniformed officer of this community? That's a serious violation, boy." The first shocking, sickening wave of the rising action was the brutal, entirely unwarranted arrest itself. As Liam, his hands trembling, fumbled in his pocket for his student ID, his only readily available form of identification, Thorne suddenly violently grabbed him. "That's it, you're coming with me, punk," he'd snarled, his face inches from Liam's. "We'll sort this out down at the security office. You're under arrest for multiple HOA violations, operating an illegal commercial enterprise, and resisting an officer." The arrest was a grotesque, disproportionate display of unrestrained force. Thorne twisted Liam's arm sharply, brutally behind his back, forcing a strangled cry of pain from the boy's lips. He shoved Liam's face hard against the unyielding plastic side of the golf cart, his knee grinding viciously into the teenager's already compromised, painful left leg. The insulated cooler containing Mrs. Peterson's precious life-sustaining insulin clattered heavily to the ground, the impact jarring the fragile vials within, threatening their integrity. Liam, now terrified beyond words, tears welling in his eyes, his body racked with agony, had pleaded with Thorne, his voice hoarse. "Please be careful with the medication, Mrs. Peterson. She really needs it. She'll get sick. My leg. You're hurting my leg." Thorne had merely laughed, a cruel, barking, utterly devoid of humanity sound. "She can wait." He'd spat his breath foul. "Maybe next time you'll learn to respect the rules around here, punk, and to respect your elders." It was at this horrifying, sickening juncture that Anya Sharma, her blood running cold with the prosecutor's ingrained outrage, her attempt at a peaceful Saturday, shattered into a million pieces, had arrived. She strode towards them, her usual courtroom composure, replaced by a tightly coiled, visible fury. Her expression was unreadable, a mask of professional neutrality, but her eyes, dark and intense, radiated a chilling authority that momentarily, almost imperceptibly, gave even the brutish Thorne pause. "Officer." Anya said, her voice deceptively calm, yet laced with an unmistakable thread of tempered steel, a voice accustomed to commanding attention and respect. "What exactly is the problem here, and why are you using that level of physical force on this young man? Thorne clearly not recognizing her, and obviously unaccustomed to being challenged, especially by a woman, puffed out his already considerable chest. "This is official Serenity Oaks security business, ma'am," he retorted, his tone insolent. "This juvenile is being detained for multiple community violations and for resisting a security officer in the performance of his duties. I'd strongly advise you to move along and not interfere unless you want to be cited for obstruction of an official HOA investigation." Anya's eyes narrowed to dangerous slits. This young man has clearly stated he is delivering critical life-sustaining medication. He is visibly disabled. Your use of force appears grossly excessive and entirely unwarranted. She deliberately did not pull out a badge, did not yet invoke her official title. She wanted to see just how far Thorne, and by extension, the HOA he so aggressively represented, would dare to take this naked abuse of power. "I am Anya Sharma." A pause pregnant with unspoken weight. "And I am advising you, Officer Thorne, to release this young man immediately. If you genuinely believe he has committed any actual prosecutable infraction, which from what I have witnessed seems highly unlikely, then your proper course of action is to call for appropriate medical assistance for him and then contact local law enforcement." Thorne, however, was too far gone in his testosterone-fueled power trip, too insulated by his perceived authority within this fiefdom. He sneered a truly unpleasant expression. "Anya Sharma, huh? Well, Ms. Sharma, unless you're a judge in a courtroom or his highly paid lawyer, your advice means absolutely nothing to me here. This is private property, Serenity Oaks property, and I am enforcing duly enacted community regulations. Regulations you, as an outsider, clearly know nothing about." He then proceeded with a contemptuous glance at Anya to roughly handcuff Liam, using actual gleaming steel handcuffs as if he were a dangerous felon, and bundled the terrified, now openly sobbing teenager into the cramped back of his golf cart. The precious medical cooler with Mrs. Peterson's lifeline inside lay abandoned, forgotten, on the perfectly manicured grass. The sheer brutality of the arrest, the deliberate sadistic infliction of pain and humiliation on a disabled teenager engaged in an act of profound kindness, the arrogant, contemptuous dismissal of any attempt at reasonable intervention, all perpetrated by an HOA officer whose actual legal authority was dubious at best, was a shocking, visceral display of petty tyranny escalated to the level of dangerous criminality. Anya felt a surge of cold fury. This would not stand. The second stage of the rising action began as Thorne, casting a triumphant, insolent smirk back at Anya, gunned the engine of his golf cart and sped off, taking Liam towards the Serenity Oaks Public Safety Office. This was a ridiculously grandiose name for a small, windowless cinder-block room tucked away in the damp basement of the clubhouse. He was in effect kidnapping a minor under the flimsiest, most fraudulent color of law. Once there, Liam was subjected to further humiliation and abuse. He was denied access to his parents, despite his desperate pleas. His phone was confiscated. His urgent requests for his own insulin pump, which Thorne had roughly handled during the arrest, potentially damaging its delicate mechanism, and his increasingly frantic pleas regarding Mrs. Peterson's overdue medication were contemptuously ignored, met with sarcastic remarks from Thorne about crybaby delinquents. Anya Sharma. Her mind now a whirlwind of federal statutes, case precedents, and prosecutorial strategy, immediately pulled out her own phone. The transformation from outraged bystander to U.S. attorney in full operational mode was complete. Her first call was to 911. Her voice was calm, precise, authoritative. She reported an unlawful arrest, assault, and kidnapping by an HOA security officer named R. Thorne and requested immediate local police and EMS response to the Serenity Oaks clubhouse. EMS, specifically for Liam Davies, and a welfare check with medical support for Mrs. Eleanor Peterson, citing the urgent need for her insulin. Her second call was to the duty agent at her own office, the U.S. Attorney's Office for the Eastern District. "This is Anya Sharma," she said, her voice tight with controlled icy fury. "I am on scene currently witnessing an ongoing federal civil rights violation, possibly a kidnapping under color of law at the Serenity Oaks HOA in Fairfax County. The victim is a disabled juvenile, Liam Davies. The perpetrator is an HOA security officer named R. Thorne. I need a federal team spun up Civil Rights Division lead. Get me Assistant U.S. Attorney David Chen on the line now. Alert the FBI Washington Field Office. I am on scene. I will be the primary complaining witness." As the first local police units began to arrive, their response was initially cautious, almost hesitant, somewhat deferential to the HOA's predictable claims of internal security matters and private property rights. One officer, a young patrolman, even asked Anya, "Ma'am, are you sure you want to get involved in an HOA dispute?" Anya fixed him with a look that could freeze fire. "Officer," she said evenly, "when an armed individual, regardless of his uniform assaults, and unlawfully detains a disabled child, preventing the delivery of life-saving medication, it ceases to be an HOA dispute and becomes a criminal act, potentially a federal one. I suggest you secure the scene and locate the victim." While the local police slowly began to grasp the magnitude of who was giving them directives, Anya meticulously documented everything she had seen. She took photographs of the abandoned insulin cooler with her phone, her hands surprisingly steady. She interviewed the few shaken bystanders who had witnessed parts of the incident, their initial reluctance to get involved melting away under her calm, authoritative questioning. Mrs. Peterson, meanwhile, her regular critical insulin dose, now hours overdue, was beginning to experience the terrifying, debilitating symptoms of severe hyperglycemia. Nausea, blurred vision, a racing heart. Her frantic, increasingly weak calls to Liam's phone went unanswered, diverted to a voicemail that Thorne had callously disabled. The situation was rapidly escalating from a grotesque abuse of authority to a multifaceted, life-threatening medical and legal crisis. The HOA president, Arthur Henderson, a portly, florid-faced man whose bespoke suit seemed too tight and whose arrogance was matched only by his profound ignorance of actual law, soon arrived at the clubhouse summoned by a panicked call from Thorne. When confronted by Anya, who now fully formally identified herself in her official position, displaying her federal credentials, Henderson, rather than expressing a shred of concern for Liam's well-being or Mrs. Peterson's dire medical situation, immediately went on the offensive. He chose to double down aggressively, backing Thorne's egregious actions. "United States Attorney Sharma, is it?" Henderson blustered his jowls, quivering clearly, attempting to intimidate her to assert his dominance in his perceived kingdom. "While I appreciate your interest in our community's private affairs, Officer Thorne is a highly competent, highly trained security professional who was merely and correctly enforcing duly enacted, legally binding HOA regulations. This young man, Mr. Davies, has unfortunately been a persistent source of minor disturbances, shall we say, always flouting the rules. Perhaps this unfortunate incident will finally teach him some much-needed respect for our community standards. I assure you, Ms. Sharma, this is an internal Serenity Oaks matter, and we will handle it appropriately and privately. Your federal intervention is neither required nor welcome, nor frankly lawful on private property." He even had the astonishing audacity to make a thinly veiled threat about Anya grossly overstepping her jurisdiction and potentially harassing private citizens on private property without cause. He hinted at powerful connections, influential friends who wouldn't take kindly to federal interference in their exclusive enclave. The blatant, unrepentant complicity of the HOA leadership in condoning Thorne's brutality and their active, arrogant obstruction of a federal prosecutor investigating a serious crime was a shocking, breathtaking escalation. It solidified Anya's grim resolve. She would bring the full, unyielding weight of federal law down upon them, not just on Thorne, but on Henderson and the entire rotten edifice of the Serenity Oaks HOA. The midpoint twist, the critical game-changing piece of information that transformed the case from a horrific but perhaps isolated incident of a rogue officer's abuse into a clear-cut, prosecutable federal civil rights conspiracy, emerged from an unexpected, courageous source. As Anya was calmly, icily, but firmly explaining the concepts of federal supremacy, Title 18 of the United States Code, civil rights statutes, and the legal definition of kidnapping to a rapidly paling President Henderson and a still defiant, sneering Officer Thorne in the increasingly chaotic lobby of the clubhouse, the local police officers now looking exceptionally nervous and distinctly uncomfortable. One of Thorne's junior security colleagues, a young woman named Maria Sanchez, approached Anya discreetly. Sanchez, her face pale as parchment, her hands visibly trembling, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and resolve, asked to speak with Anya privately, urgently. In a quiet corner of the opulent, ridiculously oversized lobby, out of earshot of the sputtering Henderson and the glowering Thorne Maria Sanchez, her voice barely a whisper, fighting back tears, provided the missing damning piece of the puzzle. Ms. Sharma, U.S. Attorney, you need to know, Officer Thorne, he has a thing about Liam, a real vendetta, and about kids with disabilities in general. He thinks they're coddled and get away with too much. She explained her words, tumbling out in a rush that Thorne had been complaining vociferously for months about Liam, using his disability as an excuse to break rules, specifically regarding his scooter speed, which was rarely excessive, and his unauthorized deliveries, which were entirely volunteer-based. Thorne had reportedly made numerous derogatory, hateful comments about Liam in the security office, calling him a crippled little punk, a menace to the community's image, and other even viler epithets. He'd mocked Liam's gait, his reliance on the scooter. More damningly, Sanchez revealed that just last week, during an official HOA security staff meeting chaired by President Henderson himself, Henderson had allegedly made a chilling statement. She remembered his exact words, "We need to be far more proactive in discouraging certain disruptive elements, individuals who might negatively impact our community's pristine image and tranquility. This includes unauthorized commercial activities, loitering by non-residents, and frankly, any behavior or individuals that don't fit the Serenity Oaks profile. I expect my security team to be vigilant and to use all necessary means to enforce our standards. Our property values depend on it. My investments depend on it." Sanchez and others on the security team had interpreted this quite clearly as a thinly veiled directive to target individuals like Liam Davies, anyone who didn't fit Henderson's narrow discriminatory vision of perfection. It was a tacit, if not explicit, approval of more aggressive, even preemptive enforcement tactics. Thorne, it seemed, had taken Henderson's words not just as a green light, but as a direct order, a validation for his personal vendetta against the boy. And then came the bombshell. Maria Sanchez revealed that Thorne was wearing a body camera, a recent expensive HOA acquisition, mandated after a previous hushed-up complaint. However she continued, Thorne often forgot to turn it on, or conveniently the footage from controversial incidents mysteriously corrupted, or failed to save. But today she had seen him. She had clearly seen Thorne activate his body camera just before he initiated the aggressive confrontation with Liam. "He likes to record when he thinks he's going to be the hero to show Mr. Henderson he's handling things," she whispered. "But I think this time he recorded himself being a monster." This was the dynamite. If Thorne's body cam footage existed, and if it captured the arrest, his words, his actions, Liam's pleas, it would be irrefutable damning evidence. And Henderson's alleged statement at the security meeting, coupled with his known financial stake in maintaining exclusive property values through discriminatory practices, if corroborated by Sanchez and potentially other guards, pointed directly to a conspiracy at the highest level of the HOA. A conspiracy to deprive residents, particularly vulnerable ones, of their civil rights under the color of HOA authority, all for personal and financial gain. This wasn't just a rogue officer. This was potentially a systemic discriminatory abuse of power orchestrated and condoned by the HOA leadership. Anya Sharma now had a clear, undeniable path to federal jurisdiction and a powerful, winnable case to build, not just against the thuggish Thorne, but against the arrogant Henderson and the corrupt Serenity Oaks HOA itself. The game had just changed irrevocably. The climax unfolded with the calculated, terrifying precision of a federal prosecutor meticulously building an inescapable legal cage. Armed with Maria Sanchez's courageous, game-changing statement, Anya immediately directed the now fully engaged local police, who were finally belatedly grasping the true gravity of the situation and the formidable identity of the woman they were dealing with, to secure Thorne's body camera as evidence. Now, before he could tamper with it. Thorne, under Henderson's furious but increasingly impotent, sputtering protests, "This is an outrage, you have no right. This is private HOA property. I'll have your badge, Sharma," was compelled reluctantly to surrender the device. He fumbled with it for a moment too long, his eyes darting nervously towards a small reset button. "Don't even think about it, Thorne," Anya said, her voice dropping to an arctic calm. An FBI agent who had just arrived with impressive speed stepped forward, his hand out. Thorne, deflating, handed it over. Anya then made a series of rapid, decisive calls. to a federal magistrate judge interrupting his Saturday to secure an emergency telephonic warrant for the immediate forensic review of the body cam footage and for the immediate seizure of all relevant Serenity Oaks HOA security records, including meeting minutes, internal communications personnel files, and crucially Henderson's financial disclosures related to his HOA activities. Her second call was to her Chief Civil Rights AUSA, David Chen, who was already en route. "David," she said, "prepare an emergency federal criminal complaint. Charges Title 18, Section 242, deprivation of rights under color of law for Thorne. Title 18, Section 241, conspiracy against rights for Thorne and Henderson. And Title 18, Section 1201, kidnapping for Thorne. I want arrest warrants ready for my signature the moment we confirm that footage." Just then, a panicked call came through on one of the local officers' radios. It was EMS, dispatched earlier to Mrs. Peterson's home. "Dispatch, be advised, elderly female at the Peterson residence is unresponsive, severe hypoglycemic shock. We are working her now, but it's critical. Did anyone locate that insulin?" The news hit the clubhouse lobby like a physical blow. Anya's face hardened further. The stakes had just become life and death. The body cam footage, downloaded and reviewed on an FBI agent's ruggedized laptop in a hastily commandeered, excessively ornate HOA conference room, was even more damning, more sickening than Anya had dared to anticipate. The video was clear, the audio chillingly sharp. It captured Thorne's initial aggressive, unwarranted confrontation with Liam. It recorded Liam's polite, terrified attempts to explain his volunteer mission, the critical nature of the insulin. It documented Thorne's contemptuous, cruel dismissal of Liam's disability, his hateful taunts about Liam's leg. It showed in unflinching detail Thorne's brutal, unnecessary use of force during the arrest, his knee grinding into Liam's leg, Liam's terrified, pain-filled cries, and then the clincher. It also critically captured President Arthur Henderson arriving on scene shortly after Liam had been dragged away. Thorne, preening, recounted his version of events to Henderson, including Anya's initial intervention. Henderson, his voice dripping with disdain, was clearly recorded saying, "Good work, Thorne. You handled that little punk perfectly. We need to make an example of these types. Don't you worry about that Sharma woman. She's got no authority here, just some busybody. If she causes trouble, I'll call Judge Albright and my lawyers. We own this town." He then patted Thorne on the shoulder. "Make sure that kid understands the rules before you let him go, and lose any problematic parts of that recording you understand." A collective gasp went through the room as they watched. Henderson hadn't just condoned it, he'd encouraged it, and then ordered a cover-up, implicating himself in obstruction of justice and witness tampering. With this irrefutable, devastating evidence, Anya Sharma, flanked by a suddenly very attentive pale-faced local police chief and two stone-faced FBI agents from the Washington field office, re-entered the main lobby. She confronted Thorne and Henderson again. The atmosphere in the clubhouse lobby was now thick with a palpable icy tension, the previous bluster draining from Henderson like air from a punctured balloon. "Officer Thorne." Anya began, her voice devoid of any emotion, flat and hard as granite. "Based on the irrefutable evidence from your own body-worn camera and corroborated by multiple eyewitness testimonies, you are hereby being placed under arrest by federal agents for violation of Title 18, United States Code, Section 242, deprivation of rights under color of law causing bodily injury, and Title 18, United States Code, Section 1201, kidnapping." She then turned her steely, unwavering gaze to the now ashen-faced, trembling HOA president. "Mr. Henderson," she continued, her voice dropping even lower if possible, "you are hereby being placed under arrest by federal agents for violation of Title 18, United States Code, Section 241, conspiracy against rights. Title 18, Section 1512, tampering with a witness, victim, or an informant, and Title 18, Section 15 or 19, destruction, alteration, or falsification of records in federal investigations. You both have the right to remain silent." As Anya calmly, deliberately recited their Miranda rights, the full crushing weight of federal authority descended upon the gilded cage of Serenity Oaks. The illusion of its untouchable exclusivity shattered. Liam Davies, who had been held terrified and in pain in the stuffy, dark security office for nearly 2 agonizing hours, was finally released. He was pale, trembling, deeply traumatized, but miraculously alive. He was immediately assessed by waiting paramedics, his damaged insulin pump carefully examined and then replaced. Urgent arrangements were made for an emergency police escort to rush his recovered insulin cooler and additional emergency supplies to a now severely ill Mrs. Peterson, whose life hung precariously in the balance. The fight for her survival had just begun. The falling action commenced with the swift, decisive, and unyielding intervention of federal law enforcement. Officer Rick Thorne, his arrogant, bullying demeanor completely crumbling into shocked disbelief as the stark reality of his dire situation finally penetrated his thick skull, was led away in handcuffs by FBI agents. His pathetic attempts to bluster, "You can't do this to me, I was just doing my job," were met with stony silence. HOA President Arthur Henderson, after a frantic, blustering attempt to call his high-powered, politically connected attorneys, "You don't know who I am, I'll have your jobs." This is a misunderstanding, was also taken into federal custody. He was subjected to intensive, unrelenting questioning by seasoned FBI agents, his carefully constructed facade of respectability and power rapidly disintegrating under the weight of the evidence against him. The Serenity Oaks Homeowners Association itself was served with sweeping federal subpoenas for all relevant records, financial documents, meeting minutes, emails, security logs. Its considerable assets were temporarily frozen by court order pending the outcome of the sprawling federal investigation into its potentially criminal enterprise. The gilded gates of Serenity Oaks suddenly felt less like a barrier to the outside world and more like the bars of a cage. Liam Davies, though physically recovering from the assault, bore the deep, invisible emotional scars of his terrifying ordeal. He struggled with nightmares, with a newfound fear of authority figures, with the violation of his safe space. His family, a quiet, unassuming couple, were transformed by a cold, righteous fury. Outraged by the abuse their son had endured and heartbroken by his trauma, they worked closely, tirelessly with Anya Sharma's office, becoming pillars of strength and crucial advocates in the fight to ensure that justice was served not just for Liam, but for any other potential victims of Thorne and Henderson's reign. Mrs. Peterson, after a terrifying, life-threatening medical crisis brought on by the prolonged denial of her insulin, thankfully miraculously stabilized after days in intensive care. However, the ordeal left her considerably weakened, her already fragile health permanently impacted. Her family, too, became vital, eloquent witnesses for the prosecution, their grief and anger fueling their determination to see accountability. United States Attorney Anya Sharma's office prosecuted Officer Rick Thorne and President Arthur Henderson with relentless, meticulous efficiency. The body cam footage, stark and undeniable, became the unassailable, devastating centerpiece of the government's case against both men. Thorne's defense, a pathetic, cobbled-together attempt to claim he was merely enforcing legitimate HOA rules and that Liam had been non-compliant and aggressive, collapsed ignominiously under the sheer weight of the visual evidence of his unprovoked brutality and Liam's terrified helplessness. Henderson's defense that he was an absentee president, unaware of Thorne's overzealousness, was shredded by his own words on that damning recording. The case garnered significant national media attention, shining a harsh, unforgiving spotlight on the often unregulated, poorly trained, and dangerously empowered private security forces operating with impunity within many affluent homeowners associations. It exposed the potential for egregious abuses of power when individuals with authoritarian tendencies are given uniforms, badges, and a modicum of authority without proper oversight, rigorous training, or meaningful accountability. The story resonated deeply, tapping into a wellspring of public frustration with unaccountable power structures. The Serenity Oaks HOA, facing massive multi-million-dollar federal civil lawsuits from Liam's family and Mrs. Peterson's family, as well as the ongoing criminal investigation into its systemic discriminatory practices and financial irregularities, Henderson, it turned out, had been using the HOA's image enhancement efforts to steer contracts to businesses he secretly controlled, effectively imploded. Its insurance carriers dropped its coverage like a hot stone. Its carefully inflated property values plummeted as the scandal unfolded. Many residents, horrified by the ugly revelations of corruption and abuse festering beneath the community's polished veneer, moved out unwilling to be associated with such toxicity. President Arthur Henderson, facing a mountain of evidence and the prospect of a lengthy prison sentence, eventually grudgingly cooperated with federal prosecutors, pleading guilty to conspiracy and obstruction in exchange for a recommendation of a lesser though still substantial sentence. His allocution provided damning testimony about the HOA's internal culture of intimidation, its deliberate disregard for residents' rights, and its calculated pursuit of a narrow discriminatory vision of community standards driven by greed and prejudice. He detailed how he and other board members had actively sought to drive out residents they deemed undesirable to artificially inflate property values for their own benefit. The resolution of this shocking, infuriating case extended far beyond the manicured, now tainted lawns of Serenity Oaks. Sparked by the high-profile federal prosecution of Thorne and Henderson and the deeply disturbing systemic issues it had dragged into the harsh light of day, U.S. Attorney Anya Sharma, in collaboration with national civil rights organizations, disability advocacy groups, and progressive law enforcement associations, spearheaded a powerful, tireless advocacy campaign for systemic reform. She testified before congressional committees, her presentations bolstered by the stark, irrefutable evidence from Thorne's own body cam, the courageous, moving testimony of Liam Davies and his family, and the harrowing account of Mrs. Peterson's brush with death. This initiated a vital national dialogue. The legislative battle was arduous. Powerful lobbying groups representing HOA management companies and private security firms fought tooth and nail against any federal oversight, crying states' rights and overreach. But the public outcry, fueled by the Serenity Oaks case and similar stories that began to surface, was too strong to ignore. Eventually, this national dialogue culminated in the hard-fought passage of the Community Security Accountability and Training Act, CS-ATA. This landmark piece of federal legislation established for the very first time national minimum training standards, certification requirements, and accountability protocols for any private security personnel performing duties that intersect with public law enforcement or involve the potential use of forced detention or infringement on civil liberties within residential communities. The Act mandated comprehensive standardized training in de-escalation techniques, disability awareness, and interaction protocols, implicit bias recognition, civil rights law, clear limitations on the use of force, and proper procedures for arrest and detention mirroring many of the standards already required for public law enforcement officers. It also created a federal grant program to support HOAs and private security companies in implementing these new rigorous training requirements and established significantly stricter federal oversight and penalties for abuses of authority by such entities, including pathways for direct federal civil rights actions against non-compliant HOAs. Officer Rick Thorne was convicted by a federal jury on all counts. The judge, citing Thorne's cruelty and lack of remorse, sentenced him to a significant term in federal prison, sending a clear, unequivocal message that the abuse of authority, even under the flimsy guise of HOA regulations, would be met with severe consequences. Arthur Henderson, despite his cooperation, also served prison time for his role in the conspiracy and his attempt to cover it up. Liam Davies, though, forever changed by his traumatic experience, found a strength and a voice he never knew he possessed. The quiet, studious boy emerged as a courageous, articulate young advocate for disability rights and against bullying and the abuse of power. He spoke at conferences at schools, his quiet dignity and unshakable resilience inspiring thousands. His journey was not easy. Therapy was ongoing. Trust was hard-won, but he refused to be defined by his victimhood. Anya Sharma, a year later, watched a live stream of Liam addressing a national youth leadership conference. He spoke not of anger, but of hope, of the need for empathy, for accountability, for communities built on respect, not fear. A profound sense of pride, mixed with a touch of melancholy for the innocence, lost, washed over Anya. It wasn't just pride in the successful prosecution, the convictions, the new law. It was pride in Liam, in Maria Sanchez's courage, in the system, however flawed, that could, with relentless effort, bend towards justice. She thought of her own immigrant parents, of the subtle and not so subtle discriminations they had faced, of the fire it had lit in her to fight for those whose voices were often unheard. This case, born from a moment of casual cruelty on a sunny afternoon, had become more than just another file in her office. It was a reminder that the fight for justice was a continuous, arduous one, requiring constant vigilance, unwavering courage, and a willingness to confront abuse in whatever form it took, whether on a global stage or within the seemingly tranquil, deceptively serene confines of a suburban homeowners association. The challenges remained immense. Changing the deeply ingrained culture of entitlement and impunity within many HOAs would be a generational struggle. The scars Liam and Mrs. Peterson carried would never fully fade, but the positive, enduring impact of Liam's ordeal of Anya's unwavering pursuit of justice was a safer, more accountable environment for communities across the nation. It was a strengthened commitment to protecting the civil rights and inherent human dignity of all individuals, regardless of their age, their abilities, their background, or where they happen to live. And for Anya Sharma, that was a victory worth every sleepless night, every hard-fought battle. The crimson of Thorne's face had been replaced by the steady glow of justice, a far more enduring light.